Hello, everybody. It's me again, the Night Editor. Seemingly out of nowhere, just decided to make a video again. I've been working on some things in the background, some longer form content that I think will be good for this channel, but I was inspired to come back and do one of my sort of picks of the week type videos. It's just off the cuff, no script, just kind of talking about something that's been really eating up my attention recently. And that would be a new Sparklehorse album. Yes, Sparklehorse. The album, Bird Machine. Beautiful, beautiful. And let's talk about Sparklehorse a bit. Because I think Sparklehorse is somebody who is incredibly underappreciated. And I think he's a genius. And he's been one of my favorite artists for a really long time. And he's an acquired taste. So I just kind of want to talk about him in general and give you a nice feel of why I like him, a little bit of his history, and then we'll get into this new album and just discuss it a little bit. So Sparklehorse is essentially led by Mark Linkous, who's singer-songwriter, the main creative force behind Sparklehorse. It's kind of like a Nine Inch Nails thing where it's like Trent Reznor, well, until recently with Atticus, but Trent Reznor is Nine Inch Nails, Sparklehorse is Mark Linkous. So Sparklehorse's debut album came out in 1995. It was called Viva Dixie Submarine Transmission Plot. All one word. Viva Dixie Submarine Transmission Plot. Beautiful album. I originally discovered Sparklehorse because one of my other favorite artists, Tom Waits, I was reading an interview with him, and at one point he mentioned the best thing he'd heard in a long time was this Sparklehorse album, which I believe at the time was his next album, Good Morning Spider, but I could be wrong on that timing, I don't know. In any event, I went and I listened to what I could of Sparklehorse and pretty much immediately fell in love because he seemed like a kindred spirit to Tom Waits to me. He writes these incredibly beautiful melodies and songs that fall outside of the norm of traditional pop structures and embraces dissonance and sort of weird analog production techniques that just lend it a sound that sets his stuff apart from pretty much everybody else that's making pop music at the time. And the story of Sparklehorse is very interesting because, spoiler alert, Mark Linkous is now dead. He actually committed suicide back in 2010, I believe. So it's been quite a while. This new album just came out a few days ago. This is September 2024 or 2023. Sorry, what year is it? 2023. And this was put out by his family. Essentially, his brother and his sister decided to put this last album out he had been working on. And so they've kind of finalized some of the songs, put some things on there that he had already had in the can. And thus we have Bird Machine. So it is a posthumous release. It's nothing that he really put out himself, and I'm sure the end product would have been different. He was a tinkerer. He was somebody that liked to really go in and think about sound design and mood to his songs. So suffice it to say, the album that we got, I'm in love with, Bird Machine. I think it's beautiful. I think it's wonderful to hear a voice from the grave, so to speak. And I'm happy that it exists. It's a great album and everybody should go out and buy it right fucking now. But there is that sort of asterisk on it where who knows what could have been. And who cares really, because we have new Sparklehorse. So let's just embrace that and be happy with it for the time being. But real quick, I just want to give you a little bit of background on Mark Linkous, because I did tell you he killed himself, but it was kind of a long, he had a very long history of depression and substance abuse. But by all accounts, he was a wonderful gentleman. Everybody loved him. He was somebody that cared deeply about art and connecting with people and tapping into that sort of human condition through his expression, which was music. And he was great at it. He was a delicate soul, but he made absolutely incredible work throughout his life. And so his first album, Viva Dixie Submarine Transmission Plot, came out in 1995. Big break for him was that Radiohead listened to it. Tom York listened to the album, liked it, and said, "Hey, I want you to come on tour with us." This was before Radiohead became really kind of the Radiohead we know today, because this is when I want to say the Bins was the only Pablo Honey and the Bins were the only two albums they had put out at this time, so it wasn't really the Radiohead of legend at this point. But it was still a band on a major label that had some success and some good single action. This was a big boon for Mark to go on tour with Radiohead. You know, he respected their work, he got along with them really well, and this was kind of the beginning of his career, going on tour with a band he respected and that had a worldwide audience. So, unfortunately, during that tour, he overdosed. He was on antidepressants and Valium, and he was taking a lot of them, mixing with alcohol, and he fell into a coma in his hotel room. And when he passed out with his legs bent underneath him. He kind of went back with his legs bent, and he stayed that way for about, I think it's 14 hours or something like that. Some of his bandmates had come by, heard snoring in the room, and thought that he was just sleeping, didn't want to bother him, so they left him alone. Eventually the maid came into the room and found him, and couldn't get any response out of him, and he called the paramedics. When the paramedics arrived, they tried to pick him up, and when his legs straightened, there was a buildup of potassium from them being bent back so long for so far that was released, that went pretty much shot right into his heart and put him into immediate cardiac arrest. So rushed to the hospital. He was in a coma. He was technically dead actually for a little while, but they revived him, and then he went into a coma. He eventually revived, came out of the coma, but had a very long recovery process. He couldn't use his legs for a long time. He had nerve damage. He had brain damage. He said he had to relearn how to play the guitar. I mean, his fingers wouldn't even work anymore to, create chords on the frets. He felt like he was never going to be able to perform again. Eventually, his dexterity kind of came back in his hands, although even to his dying day, he said it was never the same as it was before. But he started, performing again in a wheelchair because he couldn't walk. He had lost use of his legs. So for a long time, he was operating at a very diminished capacity. He had a second album that was almost finished at that time. He wrote a couple more songs. It came out, which is Good Morning Spider, which is a beautiful album, and a lot of people say that has a lot of songs on it that are directly discussing his overdose and his recovery and all that sort of thing. And well, that may be true in some ways, because again, he was kind of a tinker that went back and did things to his music before they were released, before he felt like he was happy with them. Most of the songs were written before the accident, so really there's not a lot of real meat there to key in on and figure out, this is how he felt about this, that, or the other. In any event, he eventually recovered pretty much fully and went on with his career, making albums, collaborating with people like Tom Waits, PJ Harvey, all sorts of great people. And he put out a string of albums. It's a Wonderful Life, Dreamt for Light Years, In the Belly of a Mountain, and did a couple of collaborative efforts. Most famously would probably be Dark Night of the Soul, which he and Danger Mouse did together, and David Lynch, the filmmaker, collaborated with him on. And they had a bunch of guest vocalists coming in and out. It was a really great record. But that was sort of the last thing, other than another side project he did with Finez, which is like an ambient sort of artist. It was more of an EP. But it's essentially been since 2010 until today that we've heard any new Sparklehorse material. And so that's a 13-year gap of silence. And so it's really exciting to hear anything from Sparklehorse. And the good news is the album is great, because that songwriting capability that he had, he never lost it. No matter how depressed he was, no matter how much issues he was having with substance abuse at the time, physically fit, able, he still was able to write great songs consistently. And it's really an amazing thing. One of the things that first attracted me to Sparklehorse was he was an artist that if you heard one of his songs and then you heard another one of his songs, you might not think they were even the same artist sometimes, because he could completely represent himself as a broken, fragile thing on a song, where his voice is this cracked sort of radio transmission from beyond the grave, very frail, very broken. Not something that you would think of like a traditional production that a singer would put on their vocals. This was stuff that sounded immensely sad and emotional and frail, fragile, and it was beautiful in that way. It was he liked to record with really oddball sort of equipment. He would go to thrift stores and pawn shops and buy like really cheap, shitty microphones and keyboards and things like that. So they always had this really interesting sort of sound quality to them, going back to that idea of the sound design that I always found intriguing on a lot of his albums. He used a lot of equipment that wouldn't be considered professional. It wouldn't be considered high quality, but he got amazing results out of them that let his music kind of stand out and sound unique during that time period that he was releasing albums. And even still today, he has an unmistakable sound. One of the things that I've always loved about him, that I think outside of the Beatles, Sparklehorse probably made the most or the best use of mellotrons from any band I've ever heard in my life. He's got mellotrons all over a lot of his albums, and mellotrons have a very specific sound. It's a tape-based sort of sample or keyboard, but even on this new album, Bird Machine, there's mellotrons on almost every song. And we even get, he would every now and then he would throw out these instrumental sort of interludes or instrumental songs on his albums that were always haunting and creepy and hypnotic. And we even get a little bit of that on Bird Machine with the end of Oh Child, I want to say it is. This kind of goes into this ambient sort of interlude, and it's just great to hear that again. The sort of unique and identifiable sound that is so Sparklehorse immediately, that it doesn't sound like anybody else. It's just great to hear. So you add that with being able to write hooks, being able to write choruses, being able to play the guitar really well, being able to play the drums really well. Drums are one of the things that I just love on his albums. He recorded a lot of his own stuff in his own studio, Static King. And again, he did it with a lot of analog production techniques, but I've always just loved the sound of the drums on his records throughout the entire span of his career. He always had an incredibly interesting way to record drums that has always stuck out to me as something really special. But again, eventually, even after putting out an album with Danger Mouse and David Lynch that was well received, he had some personal problems, still having substance abuse problems, and eventually, as I said, committed suicide by shooting himself in the chest in 2010. So it's incredibly sad to think about Sparklehorse, Mark Linkous, as an individual, as an artist with so much talent and so much potential and so much recognition from his peers, but just unsuccessful as a musician sort of in the music business, and battling depression and battling personal problems in his life that he just couldn't overcome. It's never great to have an artist that leaves us too early. It's never great to have anybody that leaves us too early, but especially when somebody had affected me so much through their work and I had been such a big fan, it was kind of devastating. I mean, honestly, between Mark Linkous, I would say the only other celebrity death that ever really affected me was David Bowie. Just two people that had a lot in common, I think. They had this sort of uncompromising creative attitude, and they really didn't give a shit what other people thought. And they were great songwriters, they were great producers, they were just incredibly talented, and they had a lot to say. Their paths obviously went different ways. Bowie became sober and was able to kind of rein that demon in and go on with his life and produce incredible work outside of the scope of that sort of environment. But Sparklehorse unfortunately didn't. However, that brings us to Bone Machine. And so, or I'm sorry, Bird Machine, not Bone Machine. I'm thinking of Tom Waits again. I do want to talk about Bird Machine a little bit here because, again, I think this is a great sort of microcosm of a lot of his work. We get all the different sides of Sparklehorse here, as we did on pretty much every album. We get the sort of abrasive, dissonant punk side with songs like "I Fucked It Up" and "It Will Never Stop." We get, you know, the beautiful ballads like "Oh Child" or "Hello Lord." Everybody's Gone to Sleep, and then we get sort of the pop, sort of just straight pop bangers, you know, like Kind Ghosts and Falling Down, Evening Star Supercharger, of course. We even get the instrumental things, you know, there's an instrumental guitar piece on here called Blue, which is beautiful. There's the instrumental back end of "Oh Child," which again is the more sort of creaking, creepy, weird, ambient, analog instrumental sort of thing that Sparklehorse excelled in all the time. But that being the case, I just want to talk about a couple songs here that have stood out as early favorites for me. And the first one would be "Kind Ghosts." And this song is just beautiful and heartbreaking in so many different ways to me. But I'm going to play a little bit of it here for you, just so we can kind of get a taste of it.
Somebody's scarecrow is crying. How could I've not noticed the hammers that did me in? Oh, where were you, my kind ghosts, when I needed you? Oh, where were you, my kind ghosts, when I needed you? I came to drink more whiskey than water, nailed up and confused, like a horse on a highway. Come to me, my lamb, I'll wait in the magnolia. I've swallowed a phantom, and I forgot how to breathe. Oh, where were you, my kind ghosts, when I needed you? Oh, where were you, my kind ghosts, when I needed you? Oh, where were you, my kind ghosts?
So one of the things that I love about the song, other than, you know, just the writing, the lyrics are great. The structure is just non-traditional in every sense of the word. He's got this great chorus that appears multiple times. It's never musically consistently the same. And then again, with the sound design, he understands the way to open this up when that second chorus hit, and it just brightened everything up. And there was all these harmonies and the different guitar melodies that were accompanying it. It's just a beautiful sort of open, bright feeling that you get when you listen to this. It just sort of explodes in a very quiet and beautiful way that's very powerful. But then, you know, there's no verse, chorus, bridge, you know, there's no traditional sort of structure here either. They just kind of trail off at the end, and it's really two choruses that aren't even the same. And it works. It's very effective. And just to key in on some of the lyrics here, if I have them pulled up, one of these really got me here. I came to drink more whiskey than water. You know, as an addict, that is incredibly sad to hear. You know, I think a lot of people have been in that position. A lot of people know what that feels like. And it's a very simple line, but at the same time, it's something that's honest, and you know that it's something that he's saying that is soul-bearing. I swallowed a phantom and I forgot how to breathe. Just I don't want to put words into his mouth, but this could be seen as something like trying to battle depression. I mean, it's just sad when you hear people that are hurting and are struggling as they're expressing it through their art, trying to figure it out, trying to exorcise some of those demons, trying to release some of that pain and tension in some way. And they do it in such gorgeous ways that it affects the listener and affects the person that's engaging with the art, but they themselves can never overcome it. It's just tragic and it's frightening in a way. Outside of that, I think one of my other favorite songs is probably Falling Down.
Inhale the earth's breath, that's your bed now. You're a hummingbird and quasar. A cannonball has flown its arc now. To be found by the plow. Years from now, keep on falling down.
You kind of hear it there in that song, but one of the other things that I always thought was really interesting about his music was that he integrated a lot of sort of country and western sort of stylings too. Like you can hear that pedal steel there during that song. It's one of the more traditional sort of songs that a lot of people, I think anybody listening to it would probably enjoy. So it's a good one to kind of entree people into Sparklehorse with if you're a fan of them and they've never heard them before. I think out of all the songs on this album, either that or Evening Star Supercharger are probably the most accessible out of all the songs on here. One of the other things that's really interesting to me is that he put a song on here called Daddy's Home. Daddy's Gone or Daddy's Home? I can't remember now. Daddy's Gone. Which was also a song that appeared on this album, Dark Night of the Soul, the aforementioned Sparklehorse and Danger Mouse / David Lynch collaboration. Same song. He even does the lyrics for it on this one, even though there's a lot of people that do a lot of the different lyrics. And it's just kind of a more stripped down version, different arrangement perhaps. I don't know, I'd really have to listen to them back to back again to really think about that. But kind of interesting. I think it was just something they had sitting around in the can that he'd already had done, and they put it on here, kind of beef up the track list maybe. But that's kind of the only point on this album where I'm a little not totally with it, because again, great song, interesting to hear an alternate version of it, but it's already been released, so it's a little weird to kind of put that on here. It feels more like they're trying to pad something out. But again, great to hear any sort of Sparklehorse that came in. So just happy to have this album. I really love it. I would just say go listen to it for yourself. I don't know how else to put it. I don't like to try to sell people on things. I don't like to try to convince people. I just want to kind of talk about something that's been on my mind, which is Bird Machine. And if you watch this, thanks for watching. Go check out Sparklehorse. I think I'm going to do some 101 type videos on some of my favorite artists and musicians, directors, painters, whoever it may be. And I think I would like to do one on Sparklehorse that just kind of walks through his career and his albums and talks about the highlights and sort of the larger concepts that he liked to delve into over and over again. But regardless, I don't want to make any promises because I hate making these videos, essentially. It's hard for me to find time to sit down and do this, but just because, Sparklehorse had a new album out, I felt like I had to say something about it. More people need to be listening to him, more people need to be talking about it, more people need to be buying it. It's available, in a bunch of different formats for a bunch of different retailers. and digitally, of course, on Bandcamp or wherever you stream shit, like whatever the fuck, Apple or Spotify or whatever. But I would encourage you guys to try to own this physically. A lot of his old records or 99.9% of his old records are out of print on vinyl, and they're incredibly hard to find. I sold off the majority of my collection. All I really have left at this point is some 45s of his. And I had these really terrible pressings that were by Plaid Room Records. So if you find these, the Plaid pressings of some of his older albums, like Good Morning Spider, maybe even Dixie Submarine Transmission Plot, any of those, and they're on Plaid, just avoid them. They're not worth it. They're incredibly expensive on the secondary market. I sold them off because I'd heard they were going to be doing a repress of all these through a better label. Turns out it was Vinyl Me Please. It put out a $400 box set that sold out almost immediately. And of course, I never got one. And now they never repressed the album again. So I sold off my collection for no reason, essentially. So if you can find anything, check it out. They're available on CD. They're available digitally. So that's probably your best bet at this point. But, you know, hopefully enough people join the Sparklehorse fan base and really encourage other people to listen that we do get those represses, because I would love to have you know, his catalog pressed really well on vinyl again. So here's hoping. I miss you, Mark. I'm glad we get to hear from you at least one last time. Hopefully there's some other material that comes out in the future. Who knows? You know, his brother and his sister seem to be going at this with the best of intentions and out of genuine love and respect for his fans. So again, hopefully we can echo that back to them and help them kind of realize that he does deserve a wider audience and there is a thirst for his material out there. So that being said, Night Editor out. See you again sometime soon, maybe.